Today's guest is someone who truly understands what it means to lead when things get hard. Bernadette McClelland is a global keynote speaker, best-selling author, and leadership expert who helps organizations think clearly and make better decisions when the pressure is on. She's worked with companies like Nokia, coached Harvard MBA students, and even shared stages with the one and only Tony Robbins. But what makes Bernadette's perspective so powerful isn't just the stages or the accolades. It's the life behind the lessons. Bernadette's journey has included reinvention, resilience, and a willingness to question the way we think about leadership, sales, and success itself. She's known for helping leaders stop overcomplicating things and start making decisions that actually move businesses forward. She's also the author of 6 books and is currently preparing to release her newest one, Becoming a Sales Leader of Influence, along with a new podcast by the same name. And just to make sure we don't take life too seriously today, here's a little teaser for what's ahead. Walking the Camino solo and ziplining in Africa. I think we're in for a treat. So Bernadette, I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Carrie. I've been looking forward to this one.
I am so excited.
It's a pleasure to hang out with you yet again.
I know it. I'm so excited. And you know, it's so funny because I'm reading all these wonderful things about you. And I remember being on another podcast, and I feel like that's the worst part. It's just like sitting through the description of yourself is like, oh my gosh, let's get into it. This is crazy. Or at least it was for me anyway.
Oh, well, you wrapped story around it, which makes a big difference.
Yeah. Okay. So first things first, when I start out with somebody, I really like to get into, before we get into leadership and sales and all the things that we're going to talk about, all the big ideas, I always love starting with something more human. So when people look at everything you've accomplished today, they see the global stages, they see the books and the influence, but who were you? Who was Bernadette before all that? What was the younger Bernadette like?
Ooh,
I know it's a loaded question. Where do you begin?
At 60, so actually I was sitting with a couple of girlfriends the other day, and one of them's turning 65 years today. It's 65 years old today. And I said, welcome to the club, me too. And then she told me the year that she was born in, and I said, hang on, that means I'm not 65. And I said, I actually don't know how old I am. I'm not 65. I'm older. So there's a lot of remembering to do. So the younger version of Bernadette. I guess I've always been curious. I've always been somebody who asks why. I think my mum and my grandmother have always said since I was, knee high to a grasshopper, it was always about why. So I think I was one of those toddlers or one of those young ones that kind of drove you around the bend. But yeah, I've always been curious, and I guess I've always been social. And also in that mix of being social, there's also that part of me that likes to be by myself. So, just reflective, and I love to write, and I love to go deeper in my thinking. And it's probably only been the past 10 years or so that I've kind of taken that thinking out online, and kind of started to share deeper thoughts around, my thoughts on sales leadership, life in general. But I guess the earlier version of Bernadette was somebody who was also very externally validated. And that's something, as I've got older and wiser, and I just think back to how I just worried about what people thought about me being so white-skinned, and and just visually what, weight and things like that. And I just look back and I think, oh man, people really don't care.
Right.
So worried about themselves.
Yes, I feel like that's definitely something we kind of learn later in life as far as caring what other people think. I think you hit maybe a certain age, and it just kind of you just go, who cares? It's not affecting my life. I also
Yeah.
think it's really interesting that you said, you were a curious kid and always asking why, because in my life, one of the things that I've noticed about the people that I've respected the most, the people that I've thought were just the smartest whips were always the people that were curious, always the people that were asking why. And we're not afraid to ask the dumb question, like nothing ever was too small or too basic of a question. And I think when you're released from that, it allows you to gain so much more knowledge. And the smartest people I ever have met or known were always the ones always asking the questions of why and wanting to know more.
I totally agree with that. And for me personally, I think, and I think this is a really good conversation to have as well, is that as kids, we do ask why a lot. And this is me reflecting on me, by the way.
Yes.
Is that, yes, that ability to ask why. And then I think for some of us, we get to a point where perhaps for whatever reason that encouraging or that ability to ask why is suppressed or is stopped for whatever reason, whether somebody's kind of said don't, or that's a stupid question, or whatever it may be, and therefore you don't ask why. And
Right.
so
It's like it's like the worry of what will they think? Oh my gosh. Right.
Yeah. And that was me. And so from my perspective, that's my learnings coming out of kind of like growing up, I guess, is like getting wiser, is how not asking for help has actually slowed me down over the years. So that like being that curious person, then suppressing that curiosity, and then kind of uncovering that curiosity again, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've spoken openly about experiencing bankruptcy and even a period where you were bedridden before rebuilding your career. What did that season teach you about resilience, that just the success, all the success that you've experienced, that could never have taught you? What did that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I call that, if I was ever to do a TED talk, I would call it the blessings of bankruptcy. And, that's a period in someone's life that they, and I speak quite candidly with you here, it's a period of life for some people where they believe their life is over, and for some it is. And my husband and I, we do both speak quite openly about it. My husband's not a big talker, but he has come on a couple of lives with me.
We'll get him out here.
As the provider and protector, because we had a family business, a bricks and mortar business, and I got sick. And so as the provider and protector, he wasn't able to fulfill his husbandly, manly duty. And so his thinking went down a dark path. And for me, it was more physical. And so what that enabled us to do, and we lost properties, we were on welfare. So we literally weren't able to get a lot of money out of our business at all for lots of different reasons, the way the business was set up and a whole heap of different reasons. And what we were able to get out of the cash-wise out of the business was enough for my son's braces, a few other bits and pieces.
Very important. Very important.
To actually invest in me. So we looked at the cash that was literally in a little black evening bag under our mattress, like it was the typical under the mattress cash. And we had a choice. We could either take that cash and bank it or keep it under the mattress and I go get a job. Or we could take it all and bet it on black and bet it on ourselves. And so we invested it all in me. And
amazing.
Yeah, and of course that then led to that, and which led to that, and so the domino effect went upwards. But the learning was not so much resilience, because I did a lot of research around this. Resilience in actually is the bouncing back, and is the bouncing back to where you've come from. And so my mantra is, who wants to bounce back?
We're all going to bounce back from something. Different thing.
A totally different direction. And so I want to go up. I want to go momentum. I want to go vertical. And so there's a great book out there, if anybody wants to kind of research it or read it, called Anti-Fragile, by a guy called Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And it's called Anti-Fragile. And he shares his three states, if you like: fragility or fragile, which is what we all are at some point, whether we're leaders, whether we're parents, but it's that fragility. Like, picture a glass, vase or something, and we wrap it in bubble wrap and tissue paper, and we put it away. And we do that with our kids these days.
Yeah.
We do it with ourselves. We protect ourselves. The next stage is resilience, which is really that ability to bounce back to the previous state. But the third state is the opposite of fragile, which is not resilience, it's actually anti-fragile, which is the ability, the human body, for example, is designed for stress. And, if you think of weight-bearing exercise, the skeleton, the muscles, if we don't, we atrophy and die, or they atrophy and die. Cyclone or hurricane prone areas they don't have oak trees, they have palm trees, which bend and flex. So we're actually designed for stress.
Yeah.
And so, looking at our lives like that, and looking at going back to the bankruptcy, how I framed this is, that whole fragility and resilience and anti-fragile. I look at it is, how do we embrace our fears? How do we, go with the flow and take on that feedback? And then how do we take that as foresight and faith? And so, coming through the bankruptcy, it kind of just is. You couldn't do anything about it. It is what it is. And how do we just have faith that, knowing that around the corner was exactly where we were supposed to be? And hey, we had no money, we were bankrupt, but that also meant that we had no debt. And so we had made a lifetime goal at 50. We were debt.
Hey, you didn't have to say how you were going to get there. You just had the goal. You manifested it.
We weren't specific enough. So, humor's got to come into it as well. And,
yes.
They say that about really dire situations, bring humor into it as well. So, and that just gave us a baseline, a core, if you like, where we could just start again. And that's what we did.
Yeah, I think you're right. As far as I think that's true about anything in life. The finding the humor is so key, just to keep helping us keep our sanity. Okay, the pressure in leadership. Speaking of which, you work with leaders navigating pressure, uncertainty, and high stakes decisions. That's the world you live in. What do you think most leaders get wrong when they're under pressure?
Very reactive behavior to start with, and I think now that the environment that we're in is so stressful for so many. Number one, there's so much ambiguity out there. It's like, what am I supposed to do this week? I've got people coming in, I'm losing staff, numbers aren't being met. Most sales leaders have come from the floor. So, they're successful salespeople in a lot of instances. So they have this control factor as well. It's like, I can do it quicker. So there's this inability to pause. And when I say pause, as human beings, we're always protecting something. we're always wanting to protect something, and because we're protecting something, and in most cases it's ego or control or something like that, we're trading something. There's a trade-off somewhere. And so leaders under pressure today, if they can, for a couple of reasons, one is for their own sanity, but also for their team's growth and for the business growth, if they are able to simply choose differently, if they are able to, what I call, go into this space, give themselves space where they can pause. I mean, that doesn't need to be sitting in some corner singing Kumbaya or anything like that. I'm not talking about that. But if they can just give themselves a break and trust the people around them and look at the way that they make decisions, observe themselves, because everything today is decision-based. Everything we do is based on a choice. And I think today leaders put so much, in the sales space anyway, in the space that I work in, everything is driven by the pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
When in actual fact, there is so many more decisions north of the pipeline that impact the pipeline. And if they just kind of chose to look differently.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, sales is so pressure filled, right? For the leaders, especially like you said, a lot of the sales leaders are coming out of sales. They were an outstanding salesman or woman, and now they're put in a leadership position, which is not always the right decision. You may be great at sales, but you might not be great at managing people. But then you've got the pressure of, every role, every department has its own pressures, but in sales, it's like, it's like the first of the month is the best and the worst, because you're like, oh, it's a new month. So if you had a terrible month, everything starts fresh. But if you had an amazing month, you're like, oh God, it's starting fresh again. And so I think the pressure, when we're under pressure and when things are not perfect, we can make mistakes and make bad decisions. When everything's like perfect, we have more time to be calm and make calm decisions, but that's really not how sales in general, you're always under pressure. So I think what you're saying is spot on, in that you have to take a minute and calm yourself down to be able to make the right decisions.
It's definitely that. And I mean, I'm not taking anything away from the challenges at all. There's definitely challenges in pipeline development, definitely challenges in lead generation. I mean, when you think about navigating uncertainty today, we've just got to look at the economy today, buyer preferences, you've got to look at all of those things, competition, tariffs, you name it, all of those. And if you think about the fact that uncertainty is causing so much decision pressure. And so whether it's in front of the board, whether it's in front of the team, whether it's in front of the ELT, whether it's and you look at it going north of the pipeline, and you look at things like understanding clarity around the role, understanding key performance activities, understanding KPIs, understanding what the leader's cadence is, understanding what someone's values are, understanding what how your team makes decisions. And there's so many little nuances going north of that pipeline that impact the pipeline, and they're all decision based. And it's like understanding what decisions actually mean, and just once you see it, you see these nuances, you can't unsee them. And it's a conscious thing, because we do so much that's rote. We do so much that's unconscious because of we've just all grown up doing a certain thing, and we don't give it a second thought. But when you're consciously aware of something and you start to focus on that very thing and you embody it and you bring emotion to it and energy to it and, momentum, then that'll impact the pipeline.
And you said you mentioned decisions. You've said a lot about decisions. So you often say that revenue is decision led. So for people who don't live in the sales world and they're just coming into this and they're going, I don't know what she's talking about. What does that really mean? How does it show up in everyday leadership? The people that revenue is decision led.
Yeah, and I'll give you a couple of examples as well. So, I mean, if you think about the fact that every single minute of the day, you and I and your listeners are making choices. We're making choices about what we have for breakfast. We're making choices about how we make our coffee. We're making choices about whether we drink from a normal coffee cup or we choose it's not that serious.
I love the plug. I love the plug.
I don't have any alcohol in it, but
this could be an espresso martini. We don't know.
Right. Decision. And so it's interesting because I did this, I think how I met you, I'm not quite sure, but I did a survey, Pulse of the Revenue Leader, a couple of years ago, and I'm actually in the middle of preparing another survey for sales leaders right now. And what the research revealed, it revealed conditions that actually showed where decision-led leadership really mattered. And it was around the challenges around pipeline, it was around navigating uncertainty, and it was also around emotional leadership behavior. So if you think for a moment about any form of decision that we make, and in a leadership role, so one of my clients, this is really interesting, one of my clients had interviewed a salesperson, and this particular salesperson, and it was online like this, and this particular salesperson said to the sales leader, I would now like to meet you in person. It was local, which to the sales leader was a little bit like, oh, which rubbed the sales leader up the wrong way.
Oh.
A little bit, because that's not a normal thing. Which is interesting in itself. So let me just go with this. So this was fed back to me, and my response back was, what's wrong with that? Anyway, long story short, this was part of a decision of that sales leader. His decision-making process was based on his bias. The interviewing salesperson, I said, what if he had made a decision at another role and he had made a wrong decision? And he was now being extra vigilant or diligent or whatever, and wanted to just make absolutely certain that this was the right role. And so the meeting was had and he was onboarded. Now, where I'm coming from there, that is decision-led revenue example. Because we are making decisions all the time. And that was an unconscious decision on behalf of the sales leader. But
it's interesting. I think also too, like just questioning, why is this making me uncomfortable? Like, why does
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
challenging to help us make those decisions. Why would I feel uncomfortable with that?
And that is part of the whole component of it is leaning into any resistance we feel, because resistance is data. Resistance is information.
Interesting. So you mentioned that one of the biggest challenges leaders face is not trusting themselves enough. Kind of, in this same, this leader is uncomfortable with that, and then it's like, why are you uncomfortable? So why do you think that so many capable people second guess their instincts? When I think we see it all the time. It's like, well, you're very capable, you're very successful, you should just whatever your instinct is, you should just go with it. But that's not always the way it works.
We're human beings.
Indeed.
And that comes back to really that very first question that you asked me. Tell me about the younger Bernadette, and all of us are younger versions of ourselves living in an adult body, and it's really interesting. A lot of the work that I've done around psychology and the brain and all the rest of it. I'll look at somebody now if they absolutely tick me off. If I'm being quite biased, and I'll look at them and I'll just envisage them as being, 5-year-old Tommy or 10-year-old John, and then my whole thinking shifts.
That's actually a really good trick. I'm going to use that. Next time.
You kind of soften. You kind of think, oh, you poor thing.
Oh, poor little fella.
A little bit like that. But it coming back to your question. We're all human, and we have, I've coached some of the highest leaders in business, and I've been so fortunate and privileged, and I don't take that role lightly because I've been let in to their worlds. Like, I know what keeps them up at 3:00 in the morning, and they've shared stuff with me that has kind of had me sit back, and I've got, whoa, okay, why do I feel so much imposter syndrome when these guys are sharing their imposter syndrome with me? And it comes back to the fact that we carry so much of that younger version of us into these bigger rooms. And that's because we are living in the past so much. We bring that history with us. And we kind of project it into the future as well. And so that's us protecting ourselves or wanting to control things.
When I was thinking about this, when I was thinking about talking to you in this interview, I was thinking about like all of the body of your work, but in that body of work, you talk about how we live too much on the timeline. And I have been waiting to ask you this question. I really want to know, and I want the listeners to know, what does that mean? And how can people step off the pressure of where they think they should be? Because I think so many times we get so wrapped up in not where we actually are, but rather where we think we were supposed to be, where we wish we were. We spend a lot of time looking backwards and looking forwards, but not being in the right now. So I've been waiting to ask you this.
Yeah. And, I spent a lot of time, I've actually drawn this out in a model just to be able to get it in my head. And because I actually live it now, and it makes sense to me logically, strategically, emotionally, spiritually. I go there now. And so I want to be able to kind of share it in some way with your listeners. So if you can picture a line, a continuum, so, draw the line, and at the left hand side of the line is the past, and the right hand side of the line is the future. Now, if you're on that, we're all on that spectrum somewhere. And if we think about the past, the left-hand side, because we bring that to the table, whether we know it or not, that's when we're trying to protect ourselves. And that's where we trade. We trade our time, or we trade our values, or we trade our identity. We'll trade something to protect ourselves. Or the future is where we're controlling. As a sales leader, I mentioned that example before. It's like, oh my God, we're going to lose that deal. Let me take over. I'll go close that deal. So we're controlling our sales team, or we're controlling whoever it is or whatever it is, because that's future based. So we're on this timeline, and in the sales world, everything's on a timeline. Weekly meetings, quarterly targets, pipeline milestones, everything's on a timeline. And this is where the pressure comes in. And so what I say is like, okay, that makes sense. So we're under pressure on this timeline. How do we kind of deal with the pressure? And so this is where I'll say, okay, let's just kind of put a marker somewhere, and let's just get open, get honest, and let's just, where is the resistance you're feeling? What's the resistance? If you're a salesperson and you're not making your numbers, what's the resistance? Where's the resistance you're feeling? You've got to be open and honest with yourself. And it won't be the pipeline. It'll be something before the pipeline. If you're a leader, it won't be the pipeline. It'll be something before the pipeline. And so you've got to call that first. And until you do that, once you do that, then that's when I say you go into what I call the gap. So I kind of have a circle above that point on the timeline. And in that gap is where you actually lean into self-trust, curiosity. You lean into those qualities that you have. But what you also do is, inside that challenge that you're facing, inside that resistance, inside that is actually the opening to you becoming a bigger version of you, if you can recognize the resistance and lean into it and then take action from that resistance.
Thank you so much for being here. I hope you loved this conversation as much as I did. And we're not done yet. This continues in part 2, so make sure you come back and join us there. That's a wrap on today's episode of Carrie, It's Not That Serious. If this conversation resonated, subscribe and share it with a woman in power in your life. You can find more conversations, more community, and all the fun INTS merch you love at itsnotthatserious.com. We're building something meaningful here, and I'm so glad you're a part of it. Until next time, remember, it's not that serious.